emerging topic, and it means closing the loop of resources so that waste becomes a resource for this system. For instance, Ananas Umum is a company based between the UK and Spain. They produce pineapple leaves waste. They produce an alternative material to leather, but actually it is a non-woven textile made of pineapple leaves. Alternative economies, for instance, the sharing economy, allow to develop to achieve sustainability. For instance, Swap Drop was an intervention between Marks and Spencer and Oxfam, inviting users to return their secondhand clothes when they didn't want them anymore, encouraging to extend the lifetime of those garments. Slow consumption is based on a slow lifestyle. And this project is Craft of Use by Professor Kate Fletcher, who is a colleague of mine. And she's interested in very much in moving beyond ownership. So instead of owning our clothes, is also interested in how we can craft and extend the life of our clothes and also develop an emotional attachment to them. For instance, this old man is wearing this jumper, and when he was growing and he didn't fit anymore, he actually woven into it another part at the back, or also he attached a string to fit the waist better. So you could see how the consumer also becomes a craft person or a maker, altering their garments, and in order to keep them for a long time. Digital fabrication means, for instance, digitally printed, 3D printed garments, or also we are witnessing an increased emergency of micro social enterprises. So designers are also becoming entrepreneurs. And in the context of craftsmanship, it's also very important to consider social and economic sustainability. For instance, this is a social enterprise working with women in a township in South Africa, providing them empowerment opportunities for the women, or enabling ecosystems like digital platforms or digital communities. For instance, Eco++ is a support program for businesses that is based on a time bank where businesses exchange their time and skills instead of money. But throughout this project, also we explored what are the challenges and the opportunities for the sustainable development of textile craftsmanship. For instance, heritage craft, at least in the UK or in the Western world, is getting lost. There is also a generational divide, so that the older generation still owns the craft skills, but the younger generation often, they're not very much interested in pursuing a career in craft. Sometimes there is a misunderstanding because of a different language between artisans and designers, as well as the capitalistic model of growth is challenging the sustainability of crafts. Manufacturing is often being outsourced to the Far East, and this is contributing to this disappearance of manufacturing centers in Europe, for instance. Or even if in Europe we produced our clothes, they're often, when these clothes are no more longer, they are often shipped to the global south, and they are eroding the local economies. As well, there is a misperception of quality from the perspective of the consumers, who sometimes believe that crafts products are low quality. But on the other hand, there is a wide range of opportunities for using a systemic design approach, and as well enable collaborations between designers and artisans, or also to collaborate with other craft sectors. As well, there is an opportunity for craftspeople to advance their practice by using technological innovation, or also using marketing strategies or storytelling to convey not only the value of the product, but also of the people who made these products and the processes to make them. So together with the participants in this study, we co-designed a manifesto for the sustainable future of fashion. And at the end of this presentation, there is a reference list, so you can also read more about the publications in relation to this. So in this manifesto, we argue for the need to shift the focus of design from aesthetics to also consider ethics. As well, we see craft as a slow reaction to the fast fashion based on values of meaning, quality, know-how, and longevity. We also want to nurture a collective wisdom and empowering the artisans to share the resources, skills, and time within the communities. As well, we need to consider textiles as a whole system, considering the materials, the resources, processes, people, and places. As well, there is an opportunity for designers to make the intangible heritage become tangible, and also for advancing craftsmanship through a synergy between handmade and digital. As well, we need to consider how to regenerate the ecosystem, but also our human, social, and cultural systems. And this provides an opportunity for challenging the business as usual and instead make local economies flourish. And in order to sustain and scale up those social innovations, we can also consider the local, which means starting very much in a local way, but then connect those small and open and interconnected activities at a global scale. And finally, as well, this expands the role of the designer to consider also storytelling, sense-making, facilitation, and activation. So with this in mind, I then embarked in 2 participatory case studies. The first one was with Nottingham lace makers. In fact, the city of Nottingham in the UK was built among the craft of lace making. But in the past decades, most of the companies have been closed down, and there are only very few producers of lace. So with this in mind, I wanted to understand how can the designer co-create services with textile artisan communities. So I'd like to ask Pandu to please share a short film about this process so that you can hear about it, not only from me, but also most importantly, from all the people involved. And this project was very much looking at crafting a sustainable future for Nottingham lace making. Shall I stop sharing my screen, Pandu, and you share?
Okay,
your video?
yeah.
And if you want to keep posting in the chat, please do, and we will pick the questions whenever Winter wants. The audio, at least I can't hear the audio.
Have you took the sharing audio as well, Pandu?
Here I was a bit younger, at least 5 years ago, I think it was.
Wait.
Maybe forgot to tick.
Can you hear Mbak Winta?
No, I can't hear it yet.
No. I can't hear yet.
Yeah.
Mas Pandu, you can choose the option from the first in the beginning. You share it in the above. The options are in the above.
There is like a tick, the same share the audio as the system when you're about to share the video. I'm really interested in the
Book Christmas, can you help me? I will share it to you, the files. I have difficulties here.
Okay, I'll try it.
Okay.
Otherwise, we can post in the chat and maybe they can watch in their own time, whatever you prefer.
Yeah. I'm so interested in the manifesto. Probably I will translate it a bit later just to make sure everyone knows about this, and then maybe we can say it out loud together for the manifesto for the sustainable fashion here.
Maybe in the meanwhile as well, I can talk about manifesto quickly.
Yeah.
As well, actually, initially I thought let's design a manifesto for this sustainable future. But actually, what we realized is that every community has different values. And therefore, then the first manifesto with the academics was more to kind of have an understanding of what some experts think about sustainability in this context. But then actually the manifesto was a powerful tool. And I decided to, when I went to do the participatory design research, I then used the manifesto as a method with each of the communities. So each community designed their own manifesto, which is sharing their own values. So it was also interesting to see how the method evolved.
Okay.
Can you hear it right now, Mbak Winta?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. This is still downloading, Bu Krisma, from your side. Okay.
Well, I'm still waiting for the file.
Okay.
Otherwise, shall I continue a little bit more in the presentation and then we try later?
Well, probably. Is it okay, Francesco?
For me, yes. Yeah.
Yes,
At least I deliver the talk and then we see how much time we have.
Okay.
So, okay. I will go back to the slides. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay. Well, potentially I don't have to read these quotes because you will hear from them from the video. So throughout this project in Cape Town, these are some of the themes that have emerged. And these are issues for the designer to take into consideration when co-designing meaningful social innovations with artisan communities. So it's important to draw on the local knowledge of these local stakeholders in order to situate a meaningful intervention within a community. As well, often, for instance, in Nottingham, many people were not aware of Nottingham lace making, or at least of the artisans still active in the city. So it was important, and there was so much feeling of being hopeless. But instead, it was important to raise a new exciting narrative around the sustainable future of craft to make people aware about it. As well, it's important to share a meaningful vision for sustainable futures. As well, when I collaborated, I call my approach middle up down. And as I mentioned in one of the first slides, often bottom up initiatives from the artisans are not sustainable. And at the same time, top down interventions, for instance, from the government are also not effective. So in my approach, I play the role of a bridge between the artisans at the bottom and like government or the city council or other organizations at the top to create a support network of stakeholders. And then we co-design a situated service. And finally, we share the values, as I said, with the manifesto, we shared values within the community in order to support the resilience of this community. Because it's also important that the community doesn't become reliant on the designer, but they can sustain themselves in the longer term. But one of the limitations I faced in Nottingham was that, so the assumption behind that project was, since there is this strong heritage of Nottingham lace making, I wanted these few businesses still active, to get together in order to retain this craft and also make the local economies flourish. But then I faced the issue that some of the businesses were very much individualistic and profit-driven, and they saw themselves as competitors, and they didn't want to become a community. So then I decided to go in Cape Town, because the South African culture is very much, and potentially Indonesia as well, is based on the concept of Ubuntu, which means humanity towards others. I am because we are. And so I thought that it was an exemplary context for exploring this approach of community-centered design. And also it was important to understand how my project and my methodology could be also applicable in other contexts, and what I had to change in a very different social cultural context. So with this in mind, and as well, I want to here expand a bit on the methods that I used in case you're interested in doing some of this work. Especially, I was mindful of the fact that there was a white man from Italy coming from a UK university and coming to South Africa. I didn't want to perpetuate the legacy of colonialism, but so I used design ethnography as a way to immerse myself into the context. And I used participant observations and structured interviews with local stakeholders, also to map out the social dynamics and the social fabric, and as well existing relationships and interventions into the context. And during the design ethnography, I took field notes, paying particular attention to social cultural issues. As well, I used story listening and storytelling to understand what it means to being a textile artisan nowadays, from a cultural, social, economic, and environmental perspective. And I used some storytelling cards to support myself into this process of conducting contextual interviews in the artisans' factories, where all the contextual elements, for instance, the threads, the machines, the tools they used, became a prompt for this very rich conversation to understand the local system. And then, whereas until now, the process was very much focused on understanding the past and the present of textile craftsmanship, I also wanted to understand what a sustainable future may look like for these artisans. So I used sense-making tools to help the artisans frame their own vision for a sustainable future. As I mentioned before, there is no one vision, but every artisan has a different vision for a sustainable future, and I wanted to give them all a voice. And also I used some sense-making cards to understand what would happen to their businesses if some futures occurred. For instance, as I mentioned before, circular economy, digital fabrication, sharing economy, slow consumption. And then I facilitated this process of generating ideas in response to those future trends. And then I facilitated a co-creation workshop with different... Hello? Okay, shall I continue? So in the co-creation workshop, I also facilitated different artisans to come together, and I used the service design and co-design tools in order to understand what are the challenges and opportunities for the sustainable future, understand and unpack this sustainable future, understanding the social cultural issues, the people who are affected by these issues, and also we outlined a future vision and also mapped out the different stakeholders who could support the implementation of this strategy. We used a service storyboard to understand the journey of the artisans to get to this vision. We outlined a social business model canvas. And finally, as I mentioned before, we outlined a manifesto of values to anchor the community, the artisans together as a community. As well in this, I also wanted to mention that in Nottingham, in the co-creation workshop, there were not only artisans, but also members from the city council, from the university, the museum, and also consumers. But actually, I realized that in that conversation, the local government was very much more stronger in the conversation. So instead, in Cape Town, I decided for the co-creation workshop to have only artisans so that they could better express themselves and co-design the service that was the most meaningful to them. And then finally, as I mentioned before, it's also very important, working in design for social innovation, we often talk about the exit strategy because especially in Cape Town, I had to go back to the UK to finish my PhD, etc. But I was very mindful of building a long-lasting legacy with the community. So I facilitated this round table discussion where we invited members of the Crafts Council, university, retailers, consumers, and together we outlined an action plan to actually turn this idea into action. So these are some of the findings from the work in Cape Town. So being, as they say, surviving in the South African textile industry is incredibly difficult. It's hard to differentiate yourself in a sector where everybody uses the same base cloth. And this newspaper article shows that many contemporary designers and makers are starting up their own sustainable fashion brands, really building on traditional patterns, but in a very contemporary aesthetics, appealing to international consumers. These are some of the what I call photo stories, and they build their narratives of collaborations among different artisans. So through the storytelling process, they say that it's nice to be an independent entrepreneur, but often you can feel quite isolated staying in your own. And as well, this shows how it is important to build the relationships, but also it takes time to build this trust. Before I went to South Africa, I found online the Thread Count Collective, which was a group of textile artisans, and I wanted to work with them. But actually, when I arrived there, I realized that the group was dissolved. But yet they shared that this was a good support system. They shared whatever they needed, and there was a potential to reactivate a group like that. When we, in the sense-making sessions, when we unpacked what a sustainable future means for the artisans, actually for many of them, they called out for a socially sustainable future. In fact, in South Africa, there are strong social inequalities, and they say that systemic change is very important for them. But also, the first reaction is often they need a grant from the government. But often they realize that if they wait for a grant from the government or top-down support, things may come too slowly. So they decided to get together as a collective and start. So the artists, one of the main issues that we identified was that the artisans struggled to find access to information throughout the supply chain. So nowadays there is only one fabric manufacturer in the whole region, and all of the different businesses use the same base cloth. So as I say, it's difficult to differentiate themselves, and they see themselves as competitors. But instead, each of the businesses is developing a very strong personal identity to differentiate themselves. But through the co-creation process, they understood also that actually they all share the same challenges. So they decided that only if we get together, they can make an agency of textile artisans. So they decided to create this collective of artisans called Weaving the Threads, symbolizing the relationships that were woven amongst different businesses. And here you can see me together with the other artisans holding in our hands the manifesto of values that we shared as a community. And the service that we co-designed was an online platform allowing the artisans to share information throughout the supply chain. So one of the issues was where to find seamstresses, because often those artisans live in a township and it's difficult to get access to them, as well as to do a quality control. And also as well where to find the screen printers, retail spaces, etc. So this open database allows the artisans to have also create a brand of Made in Cape Town and showcasing the different businesses. And as well, we outlined the importance of having a middle manager to manage this community together. But as well, this service doesn't have only a digital presence, but also we recognize the importance to have quarterly in-person meetings where the artisans would open up their studios to also consumers, as well as do collective showcases to, again, curate these exhibitions as Made in Cape Town, as well as a shared representative for international trade shows, and as well using social media as a communication campaign, and also every year to meet again to review if they were going in the envisioned sustainable direction. And finally, before we exited from Cape Town, as I said, we held this roundtable discussion, and we identified a person in the local university who could take ownership and responsibility for the implementation of the service. And as well, for me as a designer, it was important to have a person I could connect and share feedback and see how things were progressing. As well as the Crafts Council, based on the knowledge that we shared, they launched this online platform called Peak, which is again about this Made in South Africa. I was then invited to exhibit this social design process in an exhibition in the States. And finally, some of the artisans wanted to come also to London Fashion Week to exhibit their work and do a pop-up exhibition, as well as panel debates to start building partnerships with potentially with British fashion designers. So we organized that in 2016. And as a result of this, something that, so as well, some of this is quite very much focused on a specific context, so it may not be applicable to Indonesia, for instance, but hopefully some of the methodology could be applicable in other contexts. So as a generalizable outcome of my PhD, I produced this framework that I call crafting situated services. And this equips the service designer with a cultural sensibility when entering communities, making sense of sustainable futures, facilitate the co-design of situated services, and activate legacies with communities. Throughout this process as well, this framework outlines the different roles that the designer can play, as well as different methods and use that can be used throughout this social innovation journey. And I will unpack one by one in the next slides. So the first role I had to play was that of what I call cultural insider. So for me, coming from the outside, I had to find a gatekeeper, for instance, a person in the local university or in the crafts council, to provide me with access to the local community. On one end, I was from the outside, but I had to use design ethnography in order to immerse myself and become an insider in the community. As well, I had to be sensible towards the local context, but also what I define pretext. So the previous design experiences, because I'm very mindful as well that many people, even from the global north, they go to the global south to do an intervention, but I wanted to build, and actually sometimes the artisans feel abused because someone comes in, does a collection, and then they go away, and they're not building a long-lasting engagement. So I wanted to build on what was already there and see what we could do next. And as well, it's important not only to, as well, design is often associated to problem solving, but it's also very important to, before jumping too quickly into the problem solving mode, it's important to unpack and reframe the problem from the perspectives of different artisans and identify challenges as opportunities for change. And then as a storyteller, my role was to give voice and agency to artisans who are often very much neglected by the local community. And as well, it's not only about, as I said before, it's not the one only narrative, one only vision, but as well, it's about giving voice to the artisans and everybody to express their own vision for the future. And then as a designer, as well as building on my background as a graphic designer, I produced the photo stories. You saw a photo of it, but I used my design skills of synthesis and representation to produce those photo stories. They become an engagement tool as well, because most of what I was talking about, it's very much an intangible heritage, but as well, by making these stories become tangible, it was easier to then use them in the co-creation workshops when working across different businesses and different stakeholders to build on the stories of the artisans when we co-design a meaningful service. And then as well, throughout this, I used a situated, holistic and systematic process for doing this. As a sense maker, I had to face the fear of uncertainty. So initially, the artisans felt they were quite worried about the uncertain future, and they actually shared with me that they didn't see myself as a competitor, but they felt open enough to share their own fears for the future. And also because I was doing the sense-making sessions as a one-to-one in the different artisans, they felt much more open to share their visions for the future. In the sense-making sessions, I was reframing these global trends like circular economy or digital fabrication and making sense of them in the local realities of the artisans. So as well, I didn't come in talking, okay, let's make a circular economy, but I didn't even use that language because maybe it didn't make sense to the artisans. But I was really immersing myself in the practices that were very much rooted in the artisans' businesses and see how they could connect to those potential futures. And as well, it's not only about the future, but it's a constant process of shifting and going back and forth between past, present, and future. So actually that the future is very much rooted in the past of the textile heritage. And as well, those futures that we envisioned, I acknowledge they're not very speculative or radical, but they are what the future, there's maybe some incremental innovations that are meaningful to the artisans so that they become agents of their own alternatives. And then as a facilitator, we co-designed situated services. And I define situated services as services that are deeply rooted in a place. They acknowledge different notions of time, and they are embedded into the knowledge and practice of people. And I devised this process for crafting situated services. And in that, I had to be open to grasp and to develop an empathic relationship with the artisans, as well as flexible to navigate lots of uncertainties. And as well, weave the diverse agendas together. So in the co-creation process, I realized that often the artisans have very much short-term needs, and they find that they can't collaborate because they're very much stressed with the here and now. But then if we think, for instance, in Nottingham, the whole practice of making lace is getting lost. And when I challenge the artisans and say, actually, if you look a little bit in the longer term, if you all close down because you're just so focused on your own business, there will be no lace making anymore. And there will be no people coming to Nottingham because Nottingham will not be anymore known for lace making. So then they realize that if we think about the sense of place, then in the longer term, then it allows the artisans to gain agency as a collective. And finally, as an activist, initially, as I say, there was quite some resistance to collaborate and to innovate. But then as an I adopted this anthropological approach to activism, or what I call slow activism. That means really embedding change within the artisans. And to do this, change was very much rooted in an internal mechanism of change driven by shared values, as well as an external mechanism of involvement of different stakeholders. And I acknowledge that what we designed, it's still at a prototype level, is not being implemented yet. As well, it goes beyond my responsibilities as a PhD student. But overall, I think that the artisans were left with aspirational tools. And as well, it's a work in progress so that they can implement the way they want. And finally, I want to emphasize that in design for social innovation, often we're focused on the exit strategy, but I always felt so guilty for leaving the community because you develop an ethical responsibility towards the community you work with. So instead, I was very much more focused on what legacies we can activate with the artisans. And that's why, for instance, even after I left, I encouraged them to come to the London Fashion Week, or we did an exhibition in the States, or we found a local person in the local university who could take the artisans together in this process. And finally, my final message is that the mastery of the designer lies in the skill of crafting the approach to specific context in order to activate meaningful social innovations. So finally, as well, I wanted to understand what value can this process of crafting situated services bring to the field of design for social innovation, and see as well how other people could use it if it was valuable at all. So I did interviews with researchers, practitioners, and members of support organizations, both in the global south and in the global north, to understand how they could use this approach in their own design and research and practice. And so it emerged that this project contributed original knowledge to service design for social innovation. It made an explicit introduction of the concept of situatedness within the field of service design. And I also proposed a methodological framework for crafting situated services. I also propose an anthropological approach to activism so that the role of the activist is not so disruptive, but it's very much rooted and embedded in the local community. As well, I expand the role of the designers to include also that of a cultural insider, storyteller, sense maker, facilitator, and activist. And finally, I propose a middle up-down model of social innovation. That means that overcomes the limitation of top-down support that doesn't address the needs of the local community, but also the lack of infrastructure and resources of bottom-up innovations from the local communities. So my role as a designer was to bridge the two approaches. And finally, here you are some references of some of my publications, as well as some other publications that I've referenced in this work. And I'd like to conclude with this quote from Sublime magazine. Actually, I know that this is an old quote in 2006. This was the manifesto of Sublime magazine when it was launched, but I find it's quite timeless. And I always find reading it always makes me feel empowered. And I hope I will leave it with this, with the hope that you will be inspired and empowered to activate social change with the communities you work with. So I will read it now. Now that the future happened yesterday, now that we are not what we can buy, now that we don't need to get anywhere any faster, now that we want to make poverty history, now that people are the most important thing for people, now that we know that the greatest risk is not to risk, now that we don't need to be asleep to dream, now it's time to start again. And thank you. And also I'd like to thank Loughborough University and the AHRC Design Star for funding my research, and also London College of Fashion and Centre for Sustainable Fashion for having me now. And thank you all for listening. And I will stop share so I can see the chat because I couldn't find it.
It's okay. Please give virtual claps to Francesco by ticking the icons. Okay, claps. Okay. Thank you so much, Francesco. I tried to summarize, hopefully. So, but the most interesting is, so you collaborate the design thinking and the service design to see that what is the real to grasp more about the sustainability system and the ecosystem itself. Now, maybe for our friends here that never know, like, sometimes if we think about the ecosystem, it's just like, okay, it's a biological ecosystem, but it's like nature, Amazon, Amazon forest, kind of like that. But in a certain context, like in this fashion, textile fashion artisans context, so the ecosystem is the artisan itself and the buyer and the governments and the designers, kind of like that. Yeah, so that's what built the connections of a product. Yeah, so it's really interesting, like, because sometimes, like, as a designer, or yeah, it's just like we always focus on the product, the final product, but Francesco tried to bring us to ask us to try to see further, like broader. There is like so many connections beyond of that final product. So when we generate our product design or fashion design as well, it's like, okay, so we have to think about how's the bamboos harvester, because for instance, like in the there are so many like communities that almost distinct like for instance, like we have this Kota Gede, like the silver community, our silver artisan community, that it's like the same condition as the lace in Nottingham as well, because there isn't any like sustainability awareness or transfer knowledge between the older to the youngers as well. So and also like probably the bamboo furnitures, or maybe later Mas Pandu, Dr. Pandu or Bu Krisma can add it as well. There's like so many communities, and it will be like it's a new insight for us to try to find to see beyond of the final product. Oh, anyways, there's like a message that we can try to have a video of Francesco video in the Loughborough. Is it okay, Bu Krisma? Oh yes, let's finger crossed. Okay, is it playing already? Oh, is it not still?
You cannot hear it?
No, it's not yet. Oh,
Wait. Okay.
I'm posting in the chat the link to YouTube.
Today, we are here at Cobden Place,
Oh, yes.
and we are organizing a participatory design workshop where the artisans are here represented, and also other multidisciplinary stakeholders. So we have the Nottingham City Council, also place-making organizations, students and educators from local university, and also consumers of Nottingham lace. And today we are discussing about the challenges and the opportunities for lace-inspired artisans to move towards a sustainable future. And as well, we are brainstorming possible design directions and strategies to achieve such future. And as well, we will map out potential stakeholders to engage to support this strategy. And finally, we will also outline a collaborative service to be implemented. And we will also launch a manifesto for the sustainability of Nottingham lace. That means sharing the key values within the community to support and become a collaborative project.
It's going to support them to be more sustainable. But really, what we need then is we need them at the centre, don't we? So we need a lace-inspired artisans, because actually the service is all focused on them, isn't it? So they're at the core, and actually without entrepreneurs and artisans making stuff and selling stuff, there's nothing. This service is meaningless, isn't it?
It's been a really useful day, actually. It's been great to spend the day talking to other people from Nottingham about Nottingham lace artisans. It's been really interesting for me as a maker to kind of get other people's perspective on how Nottingham lace is viewed, and also some of their input into how I can make my Nottingham lace business sustainable.
Today has been really interesting. I've met a lot of people and makers and things like that I wouldn't have otherwise met. So from my point of view, it's nice to see contemporary work going on within the lace industry that we had for such a long period in Nottingham, and it's nice to see the continuation of that work in a modern and quite exciting way, and that people are passionate about retaining that and moving it on forward, so that perhaps Nottingham is once again known for lace and for artisan makers, and I think that would be a terrific thing for Nottingham to do.
Thank you.
okay, thank you. Maybe I will try to explain in Indonesia like a conclusion, and then maybe it will attract to questions. Is it okay? Ya, oke teman-teman, kalau kita belajar dari Francesco tadi berarti beliau itu mengajak untuk dalam sustainability ya, dalam memahami keberlanjutan dari sebuah hal, yaitu kita harus sebagai desainer itu kita harus paham terhadap konteksnya apa. Jadi kita tidak hanya sekedar fokus pada hasil akhirnya saja, tetapi kita mencoba untuk melihat ke lebih atas lagi. Ternyata banyak sekali aspek-aspek atau pihak-pihak yang terlibat. Dari ada proyek dari Nottingham dengan lace-nya maupun dengan Cape Town ya, itu ternyata pendekatan dari pemerintah ke bawah itu tidak akan berjalan juga, tapi kalau dari bawah ke atas itu perlu juga penguatan atau infrastruktur yang memadai seperti itu. Dan ternyata dalam masalahnya tidak ada bridge ya, jadi jembatan itu. Lalu juga Francesco itu menekankan bahwa menginovasi sosial, gerakan social change, perubahan sosial itu kita harus memikirkan tentang lokalitas, lalu awareness-nya, kesadarannya, lalu vision-nya, bagaimana mereka itu bisa berkembang, jadi ada tujuannya seperti itu, lalu ada kolaborasi, lalu ada service yang sangat bergantung pada konteks, tiap-tiap negara juga akan berbeda, dan pasti di Indonesia juga akan ada perbedaan dalam siapa yang pihak-pihak yang terkait atau norma-normanya, perilakunya seperti itu. Tapi juga ada resilience, jadi ketangguhan, begitu ya. Yang menarik juga adalah kita itu harus tidak boleh menjadi parasit researcher. You mentioned that we should not, as a designer, and then if we want to revitalize the community like that, yeah, and then we should not be a parasite researcher or designers that we only utilize the community for our own benefit, but we have to empower them. And there is that's the art of being a designer in a real community, ya. Jadi itu kita nggak boleh hanya untuk menggunakan komunitas lalu untuk menjadikan subjek partisipan kita, lalu kita udah aja bye-bye begitu, tapi kita harus memberikan legacy atau pengetahuan kembali kepada para di komunitas tersebut, ya. And then, dan menariknya adalah the most interesting thing here is just like the story listening and telling. Like I know there's like a ordinary observation of ordinary interview, but you emphasize the story, listening, and telling. Like we know that we have to listen with empathy together with all of the evidence, but how the process you make it as a story, and that's maybe you can explain it a bit for that.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
Shall I? Okay. Actually, I will talk a little bit about the different. I took notes when you were talking. Great.
Oh, yes.
Great summary you did, Winta. So as well, I will go back also to the ecosystem. Many projects about craft, design for craft, as you said, are very much focused on improving the quality of the product, or eventually improving the process to make it more sustainable. But in my service and strategic design approach, I was also looking at the system. And as you say, the system involves the materials, the tools, the production process, but also the artists, the people. So the artisans, the designers, the suppliers, the retailers, the consumers, the local government. So the ecosystem means, and as well, this system is like a living organism. As well, there are people who may evolve and different, and as well as the materials as well, they have their own life. And as well, even the craft, the cultural heritage has its own life as it evolves over time. So actually taking a nature-based approach to looking at this system enables to consider this craft as an evolving organism and think about the sustainable development of it. Then another point that you brought is parachuting the design. So I often find, especially because I work in the global north, but often I've even as I explained before, for my master's I went to Brazil, and for my PhD I went to South Africa, and I hope I can travel more in the future and come also to Indonesia or other places like this, because there is lots of crafts in these places, and actually we have a lot. And sometimes, like even British Council or other programs, they send us to these places thinking that we have the knowledge and expertise. But actually, I want to challenge, well, I would be grateful to get a grant to travel, but instead I want to challenge that approach where we think that we have the knowledge. Instead, it's about what we can learn from these other places in terms of cultural heritage or cultural sustainability. And for instance, actually in Nottingham, you would imagine, oh, the UK is so advanced for crafts and design. But actually that community, actually those artisans, that craft is really almost lost. and the businesses didn't even want to collaborate to become a community. Whereas instead in Cape Town, a much more, I don't know, challenging context, the artisans were much more open. First of all, the craft was still much more present. And as well, many young designers or makers are really building very interesting businesses around that craft. But also the artisans were much more open to collaborate and to innovate. So as well, I think with this process, I've showed that we in the Global North actually can learn a lot from the Global South in terms of cultural heritage and cultural sustainability and community-centered design. And as well, I want to continue doing more of these projects in order to decolonize design, which is another important topic. So instead of being a colonialist coming from the North to the South, instead shifting these power dynamics. And finally, as you said, story listening as well. Maybe, I'm much more of a design researcher rather than a designer. So I don't go to a community already with with a project, with the idea in mind of what the collection should look like, but it's very much actually it's about let go of your previous knowledge or assumptions of what the aesthetics should even be, but instead listen and understand and let the project evolve together with the communities. And together we may identify the solution, the innovation that is the most meaningful to the community. And then again, related to listening, actually listening is not being passive, but it's very much an active process of engaging with the community and then telling these stories. Then yes, I can use my design research skills in order to tell very exciting and interesting stories that connect all these fragments of this system in a very compelling way, so that contemporary consumers and other people are interested in preserving this craft.
Yeah. So it should be a movement. Yeah, you cannot just like do it by yourself. You're not the Superman.
Yes.
Yeah. And there's like a question from a student in the FSZ UNS Semarang, 11 Maret, sorry. It's not a really question, okay. But I'm curious about how do you tackle consumption and globalization that weakens heritage textile? What I get is you have to give another perspective on the to the artisan on how to keep producing the heritage textile, not based on business. But in Indonesia, the pull or the trend to consume is strong. So the consumption of the people just like stronger than the production. And it's a pretty understandable for artisans to worry about what happens next. If you can share more from your research regarding this, it will give us a great insight. Thank you.
Okay. Also, I shared in the chat a paper I just published last month with an ex-student of mine from the Philippines. And as a designer, she worked, actually after she finished their master's at London College of Fashion, she was hired as head of sustainability for a local NGO working with artisans weavers. And it's very much about, in that paper, we present a business model canvas that as well, it's very open and flexible to be adapted to local contexts. Well, it is true that globalization, mass consumption are really affecting crafts, and often these craft businesses are not financially sustainable. But I can't talk for Indonesia because I haven't been there. But for example, in Brazil or in South Africa, where I've worked, often there are international consumers who are very much interested in buying those craft products. So there is still a market for these craft, and often as well. Yeah, the local consumers, maybe they don't see the value of these products because they are so common to them. But for us, coming from the outside, they are very exciting and meaningful. And when we come and visit a place like Indonesia, we want to bring home a part of that local culture and that place. So craft products are still very meaningful for international consumers. I think in a way, maybe as it happened in South Africa, by creating a collective of artisans, potentially together joining efforts, those businesses can become more sustainable. They can help each other, for instance, to share information or share a best practice. And potentially as well, what's important is also to find, so create maybe an agency and a collective of artisans from the bottom up, but it's important also to see collaborations with universities or with local or central government to then create this ecosystem that can support the artisans so that they are not left alone and they can be sustainable. I'm not sure if I answered the question, but yeah, just share some insight.
Yeah, so basically, like, you have to, there should be bridge, yeah, to again to connect the artisans and to the global world. So there will be like a demand and the source as well. And I think it's the beauty of the storytelling. You have to tell the story of the product as well, if we be able to see from above all of the connection, it will bring the full storytelling of the product or the heritage textile itself. Absolutely. Yeah.
And actually, I think through the storytelling process as well, feedback from the artisans was that this process helped them see, because they do their practice for hundreds of years. There's so much focusing in the practice, but then even sitting with me for those couple of hours, talking about this, and not only looking at the product, but understanding what is the cultural heritage, what is the social connections within the society, and looking at the whole supply chain and also the environment, help them actually, yeah, as you say, look at the craft from the above and make these connections. And that highlights the value of these products. So the consumers actually buy this, they are willing to pay a bit more because of the value, not only of the product, but also of the process, how it is made, and also the people, because when you buy a product, you are actually supporting a livelihood. So that definitely in all the places I've been, there is a strong interest from consumers to support local crafts.
Yeah, and
so just don't give up and keep working on this and preserving about the craft, and also thinking about preserving the past, but also think strategically about what a sustainable future could be, and always make connections between where we come from, where we are now, and where we can go.
Yeah, it's to be the part of the ecosystem. And I think it's just like this more than 100 students, there's no such a coincidence, tidak ada yang kebetulan. So we have the Francesco's invitation here to develop the sustainability of any community that almost lost their capability or something like that. And it is our part as a designer to be the bridge of that as well. And I just noticed, I tried to explore those your articles. One of them, like I think this is the with the Philippines, we cannot download it. If you can just like share what is the title, and then probably we can, because it's just restricted to.
I see. I will share with you the file as it is.
We have goodies, kita dapat hadiah dari Francesco karena harusnya bayar nih kalau dapat artikel ini. So we have got like free goodies. Hopefully it will give impact to for us, and then we can just like change the world surrounding us a bit. Yeah. Oke, ada pertanyaan lagi. Kalau mau pakai bahasa Indonesia nanti nggak apa-apa, nanti kita translate-kan. Mungkin ada yang proyeknya tentang revitalisasi desain di salah satu komunitas juga. Tadi ternyata banyak sekali juga ya komunitas yang akan menghilang gitu dari skillnya. Tadi kita sudah membicarakan tentang mungkin ada kota gede peraknya, atau mungkin bambu, atau mungkin anyaman ya, Mas Dr. Pandu ya. Lalu mungkin ternyata ada kalian menemukan begitu suatu masalah dari proyek desain kalian, bisa di-share kepada Francesco dan mungkin kita dapat inspirasi atau jawaban sedikit. Okay, so bagaimana dengan so there's another questions about, probably this is about the ecosystem and the sustainability. So for the traditional textile in Indonesia, we use the either natural dye or the fabric dye, and then there is a problem with these with the waste. And then how do you think about that kind of home industry waste of the heritage textile, the local textile production?
So the waste, sorry,
so waste. if we dye, like for instance, like batik, I have introduced you to the batik, and then we always like put dye, and there's like a very long process, one by one, and there's like so many like the waste, sorry, not the waste, like the pollutant, the water pollution, kind of like that. And what do you think about that as your sustainable aspect?
Okay, well, I'm not an expert in materials, but actually maybe I will share with you some other links to like Center for Circular Design, who focus more on this. They are more material experts. On one end, I mean, definitely, I know that there is connected to textile making, there is always chemical pollutions in the rivers or the water. There is, well, many designers and makers are starting experimenting with natural dyes. So hopefully the natural dyes should be less polluting. So I would encourage you, but as well, there is much more work to be done in natural dyes, especially for making these. So you can use food waste, for instance, to dye your fabrics, as you know better than me. But yeah, I know that at a large scale, the process is not well developed enough as well to ensure the good quality across a larger scale production. But actually, I think as well consumers, when they're buying craft product, they actually appreciate, at least from my experience, they also appreciate the uniqueness of these products, or also eventually what could be an imperfection, because craft is also about making these pieces unique. So even if you can't ensure, I think, the same consistent color using natural dyes across a collection, I think still that will make the products unique and consumers will also appreciate, I think. But still much more work needs to be done in order to make natural dyeing processes sustainable and also more mainstream and diffused. And sorry for my not expert answers on materials, but I can pass you some other links if you want to explore more.
No worries. Yeah.
I must admit also that I was trying to share the file in the chat, and I'm having technical issues with Zoom, so I can't see anything at the moment. But
no worries. No worries. Okay, so there's like another question from Nanit. Do you want to open mic, or should Nanit, or do you want to have like open mics and asking to Francesco by itself, or should I just like read it? Okay, so she asked about, I want to know how to shake the love movement. Oh, interesting. Shake the love movement for sustainable design. Because it is known that in Indonesia, in particular, we use fast fashion more. So how to invite people to love the environment from the movement? Okay, so it's just like how to shift to the slow fashion.
There is fashion revolution, maybe. It's I don't know if you know, fashion revolution was established by Carrie Somers and Ursula de Castro, two women in the UK. But when there was the accident of the disaster of the Rana Plaza, so the factory in Bangladesh that collapsed in 2014 or 13, on the 24th of April, they started this movement asking people who made my clothes. And that has grown really as a global movement of activists really becoming part of this sustainable fashion movement. And I know that as is now an international movement, there are centers around the world. So I'm not sure if there is an Indonesian kind of chapter of Fashion Revolution, but look up their website and you can find. And I think join the Fashion Revolution movement, I think will be, and inviting others to join, I think it's a good first step into this sharing the love for sustainable design. And as well as Fashion Revolution has grown, they have also developed lots of resources, publications, also tools for educators and for students. So yeah, have a look at the website. I will also share the link later. And especially so on the 24th of April is actually the anniversary of Rana Plaza, but they actually now do activities for the whole week in April, but as well there is so much happening throughout the year. So have a look as a first step on Fashion Revolution or other movements like that, and we all can be part of it.
Yes, thank you for the invitation. I hope it can answer Nanit's question. Yeah, so it is. The answer is like from us. we have to set the change as a social agent, yeah, of change here. And
maybe just briefly to remind also for every social movement as well, values are very important, and especially for activating change, it's important that because different people have different interests or agendas. I think what I did with the manifesto, so if you want to create your own movement with your own little local community, maybe try to, well, not only straight away go into the manifesto, but in my experience, after I did several other things, co-designing the manifesto was an opportunity to give people, allowed people to share values that they believe in as a collective, and then that will inform the sharing of a vision for a sustainable future. So maybe try and do that exercise of co-designing the manifesto of what sustainable future means for your community. And then potentially from that, people feel inspired to start this movement.
Okay, so values to movement. Yeah, thank you so much. And we want to ask your permission to share this presentation for all of the students as well, so they can just like read the manifesto and then try your challenge. And then of course, like we will meet again at the end of October as well. Yeah, like 25th. Yeah, 25th. Yeah. So we will meet with Francesco again with another discussion, but still in this kind of area of social change. And yeah, because of the time, thank you so much, Francesco, for the opportunity, for sharing with us your knowledge and experiences. And then maybe Dr. Pandu could just like do the closing as well. And once more, please give your claps and smile, the biggest smile for Francesco. Should we take a shot? It's a must. It's our value to have.
Yeah, please. We have to take a picture together before we close this class. Apa ya? Sesa bisa foto?
Iya, semuanya coba hidupkan video.
Ada yang bisa fotokan nggak, teman-teman?
Bu Krisma bisa.
Dr. Pandu, I'll help. Yeah, I can do it.
Mbak Winta, saya kira ditutup langsung, Mbak Winta.
Iya, oke. After this photo ya. Oke. Bu Krisma?
You can count 1, 2, 3.
Okay.
Mbak Winta.
Okay, how many slides?
5 slides.
5 slides, okay. Slides 1, smile. Second, third, fourth, and fifth. Okay, thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully we can be the agent of social change as well. See you soon in the end of October. Yeah, Francesco. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Francesco, for today.
See you.
See you 25th October.
Best wishes for all.
Thank you, sir.
See you.
Thank you.